What if I told you that one of anime's most disturbing villains isn't just evil for the sake of being evil, but represents a walking case study in the complete absence of human empathy? Mahito from Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't just lack compassion, he embodies what clinical psychology identifies as a pure sociopathic personality structure, and understanding his mind reveals terrifying truths about the darkest edges of human consciousness. Today we're diving deep into the psychological architecture of a being who views human suffering not as tragedy, but as playground entertainment. And by the end of this analysis, you'll understand exactly why Mahito's psychology is so unnervingly realistic, despite his supernatural nature. Before we proceed, a quick spoiler warning for those who haven't finished the Shibuya incident arc. We'll be discussing Mahito's actions and development throughout the series, so consider this your notice to catch up if you want to avoid major plot revelations. Now, what makes Mahito such a compelling subject for psychological analysis isn't simply that he's cruel or violent. Many anime villains share those traits, but rather that his entire cognitive and emotional framework operates on fundamentally different principles than neurotypical human psychology. As a cursed spirit, born from humanity's hatred and fear of other humans, Mahito represents something that psychologists have studied for decades: the mind utterly devoid of affective empathy, operating purely on instrumental reasoning without the emotional guardrails that typically constrain human behavior. To truly understand Mahito's psychology, we need to start with the distinction between cognitive and affective empathy, a critical concept in modern psychological research. Cognitive empathy refers to the intellectual understanding that other beings have thoughts, feelings, and experiences separate from our own, essentially a theory of mind. Affective empathy, however, is the emotional resonance we feel with others' experiences, the automatic compassion that makes us wince when we see someone in pain. Mahito possesses exceptional cognitive empathy. He understands human emotions with frightening precision and can manipulate them masterfully, but he completely lacks affective empathy. When he transforms humans into grotesque shapes while they're conscious and screaming, he comprehends their terror intellectually. He knows they're suffering but feels no emotional response to that suffering. This dissociation between understanding and feeling is the hallmark of what the DSM-5 characterizes as antisocial personality disorder with psychopathic features. Though Mahito's case is so extreme, it transcends even clinical definitions. From a Jungian analytical psychology perspective, Mahito represents a being entirely consumed by what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious aspect of personality containing everything the conscious ego refuses to acknowledge. However, unlike humans who repress their shadow and project it outward, Mahito has no conscious ego to create this division. He is the shadow made manifest, specifically humanity's collective shadow regarding interpersonal cruelty. Jung theorized that the shadow contains not just personal darkness, but collective human darkness passed down through what he termed the collective unconscious. Mahito, born from concentrated human malice toward other humans, embodies this collective shadow without any compensating ego structure or superego to provide moral constraints. This makes him psychologically fascinating because he acts out impulses that most humans repress from early childhood: the curiosity about what exists inside other people, the desire to reshape reality according to whim without consequence, the pure id-driven pleasure in exercising power over vulnerable beings. Speaking of the ID, Freud's structural model of the psyche provides another illuminating framework for understanding Mahito's psychology. In Freudian theory, the human mind consists of three structures in constant dynamic tension: the ID representing primitive drives and desires, the superego representing internalized moral standards, and the ego mediating between them while interfacing with reality. A healthy personality requires all three components working in relative balance. Mahito, however, operates almost entirely from ID, pure desire and impulse without moral consideration. When he encounters humans, his immediate response is to experiment with their forms because he can, because it satisfies his curiosity, because it's pleasurable to him. There's no superego whispering that this is wrong, no ego calculating long-term social consequences beyond strategic considerations for his goals. He experiences what Freud would call primary process thinking, immediate gratification seeking without reality testing or moral consideration, except that Mahito has enough cognitive sophistication to pursue these id impulses strategically rather than chaotically. What makes Mahito's psychology particularly chilling from a clinical perspective is how precisely his traits align with psychopathy as measured by instruments like the Hare Psychopathy checklist. He demonstrates superficial charm when it suits his purposes, grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, cunning and manipulative behavior, lack of remorse or guilt, shallow affect, callousness and lack of empathy, failure to accept responsibility, need for stimulation and parasitic lifestyle. Perhaps most tellingly, he shows what researchers call instrumental aggression, violence used purposefully to achieve goals, rather than reactive aggression stemming from emotional dysregulation. When Mahito kills, he does so with the emotional investment someone might have in swatting a fly, purely instrumental and without passion. This cold, calculated quality makes his violence more disturbing than hot-blooded rage, because it reveals someone for whom other beings simply don't register as having moral worth. The developmental psychology behind Mahito's formation reveals something profound about how empathy and moral reasoning typically develop in humans. According to developmental psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development, humans progress from pre-conventional morality focused on punishment and reward through conventional morality based on social approval and law to post-conventional morality based on universal ethical principles. This progression requires both cognitive development and emotional development, specifically the capacity for empathy that emerges in early childhood. Mahito, born fully formed as a cursed spirit, never underwent this developmental process. He possesses the cognitive sophistication of an adult, but the moral development of a pre-conventional child, except without even the fear of punishment that motivates pre-conventional moral behavior in children. He understands human moral systems intellectually and can manipulate them, but they don't constrain his behavior because he never internalized them during a formative period. Examining Mahito's interactions with Junpei provides a masterclass in sociopathic manipulation and the weaponization of false empathy. When Mahito befriends Junpei, he demonstrates sophisticated understanding of attachment theory and social psychology. He identifies Junpei's vulnerabilities, his isolation, his pain from bullying, his philosophical confusion about the nature of good and evil, and he systematically exploits each one. From a psychological perspective, what Mahito does is create what's called trauma bonding, where he alternates between being the only person who seems to understand Junpei and subtly reinforcing Junpei's negative worldview. This is textbook predatory behavior, and it reveals that Mahito possesses what researchers call dark empathy, the ability to accurately read and understand others' emotions, specifically to exploit them. He's not confused about Junpei's feelings or needs. He reads them with perfect clarity, but he relates to Junpei purely as an instrument to be used, rather than as a being with inherent worth. The psychological devastation this causes Yuji, who witnessed this manipulation and failed to save Junpei, adds another layer to Mahito's impact, showing how sociopathic individuals create ripples of psychological damage far beyond their immediate victims. From a neuropsychological perspective, research into psychopathy has identified specific brain differences that might illuminate Mahito's psychology. Studies using functional MRI have shown that individuals with psychopathic traits show reduced activity in the amygdala and ventromedial prefrontal cortex when processing emotional stimuli, particularly others' fear and distress. The amygdala plays a crucial role in emotional learning and fear conditioning, while the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is involved in moral decision-making and empathy. If Mahito had a physical brain, we might expect to see similar patterns: complete absence of normal emotional processing when witnessing suffering. Additionally, research has shown altered connectivity between the amygdala and prefrontal cortex in psychopathic individuals, suggesting that even when emotional information is processed, it doesn't properly integrate with decision-making systems. Mahito's ability to intellectually understand suffering while remaining emotionally unmoved mirrors this neurological pattern. His cognitive systems operate fine, but they're disconnected from any emotional evaluation system that would make suffering feel meaningful or motivating. The philosophical dimension of Mahito's psychology adds yet another layer of complexity to his character. He operates from a worldview that philosophers would classify as moral nihilism, the belief that there are no objective moral facts and that nothing is inherently right or wrong. However, unlike human moral nihilists who might still act ethically based on subjective preferences or social contracts, Mahito combines moral nihilism with what's called psychological egoism, the view that all beings act purely from self-interest. He sees the world as a domain of power relations, where cursed spirits and humans are simply different species competing for survival and dominance, with no moral dimension to these interactions beyond strategic considerations. When he tells Yuji that he'll kill him without any personal malice, he's being perfectly sincere from his worldview. Yuji is simply an obstacle to his goals, and eliminating obstacles generates no more moral consideration than moving a chess piece. This philosophical framework, combined with his psychological makeup, creates someone who can commit atrocities without cognitive dissonance, because there's no internal conflict between his actions and his values. His actions perfectly align with a worldview that recognizes no inherent value in any being beyond their utility. What makes Mahito's psychology particularly relevant to understanding real-world darkness is how he illuminates the banality of evil, a concept introduced by philosopher Hannah Arendt after observing Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann's trial. Arendt noted that great evil often comes not from sadistic monsters, but from ordinary people who fail to engage in moral thinking, who view their victims as objects or obstacles rather than humans. While Mahito does take pleasure in experimentation, his core psychology reflects this banality. He doesn't torture humans because he hates them or because he's working through traumatic rage. He transforms them because he's curious, because it's interesting, because he can, and because they're not real to him in any meaningful sense. This objectification, this reduction of conscious beings to mere things, represents one of psychology's darkest capacities, the ability to completely dehumanize others. Research into genocide, torture, and systematic cruelty consistently shows that perpetrators accomplish terrible acts partly by psychologically recategorizing victims as non-human, a process called dehumanization. Mahito doesn't need to engage in this process because he never humanized humans in the first place. They were always just interesting objects to him. The interaction between Mahito and Todo provides an interesting window into how his psychology responds to genuine threat and how his narcissistic elements emerge under pressure. When Todo completely outmatches him physically, Mahito doesn't experience normal fear responses or submit. Instead, his grandiosity and need for control intensify. He becomes more determined to understand and overcome the threat, viewing it as a puzzle to solve rather than a danger to flee. This reflects what psychologists call narcissistic injury, when someone with narcissistic traits encounters evidence contradicting their grandiose self-image. For Mahito, being dominated challenges his sense of superiority and control, and rather than accepting limitations, he doubles down on asserting dominance. This pattern continues throughout his encounters with Yuji, where each defeat seems to fuel his obsession with proving his superiority rather than teaching him caution. This inability to learn from experience in a normal way, to adjust behavior based on consequences, represents another psychopathic trait called low behavioral constraint, where immediate goals and ego needs override learning from punishment. The psychological relationship between Mahito and Yuji deserves special attention because it represents a fascinating dynamic between a being without empathy and one with exceptional empathy. Yuji represents the opposite end of the psychological spectrum, someone whose identity is built around protecting others, and whose curse technique literally requires understanding souls on a profound level. When Mahito tells Yuji, "You are me," he's making a statement that's psychologically revealing about his worldview. He genuinely doesn't understand the difference between himself and Yuji because he can't comprehend that emotional responses to suffering actually constrain behavior for most people. He sees Yuji's mercy and his own cruelty as equivalent choices, different preferences with no moral distinction, because he lacks the internal experience of empathy that would make the difference felt rather than just intellectual. This creates dramatic irony where Yuji experiences Mahito's actions as profoundly evil, while Mahito experiences them as morally neutral, equivalent to Yuji's choices simply expressed differently. The psychological gulf between them is so vast that they literally cannot understand each other's fundamental motivations. From a trauma psychology perspective, Mahito himself could be viewed as a manifestation of collective trauma, the embodiment of humanity's accumulated experiences of interpersonal cruelty and the fears these experiences generate. Trauma researchers discuss how traumatic experiences, especially interpersonal trauma like abuse, betrayal, and violence, get encoded not just in individual memory, but in cultural memory and collective consciousness. Mahito represents this accumulated darkness given form, which creates a disturbing feedback loop, where human cruelty creates cursed spirits that embody that cruelty, which then perpetrate more cruelty, feeding the cycle. This mirrors how trauma operates in real psychology, where traumatic experiences can lead to trauma responses that perpetuate cycles of harm. Someone who experiences childhood abuse may develop aggressive or avoidant attachment patterns that create relationship difficulties, which reinforce negative beliefs about relationships, which influence behavior in ways that make healthy relationships harder to form. Mahito represents this cycle externalized and amplified into a being whose entire existence perpetuates the very fear and hatred that created him. Understanding Mahito's psychology teaches us several profound lessons about human nature and the importance of empathy in constraining harmful behavior. First, it illustrates that intelligence without empathy creates not wisdom, but sophisticated cruelty. Mahito is clever, philosophically engaged, and capable of complex planning, but all these cognitive gifts serve only his selfish aims because they're not guided by concern for others' welfare. Second, his psychology reveals how thin the line is between human and monster when empathy is removed. The capacity for cruelty exists in most humans, constrained primarily by empathy and internalized moral values. Without these constraints, as Mahito demonstrates, even playful curiosity becomes torture when applied to sentient beings treated as objects. Third, Mahito shows us why psychopathy represents such a profound challenge for society and psychology. Someone who cannot feel others' pain has no internal motivation toward prosocial behavior beyond strategic self-interest, making rehabilitation extraordinarily difficult because the emotional foundation for moral behavior simply doesn't exist. The profound horror of Mahito's character lies not in his supernatural abilities, but in how recognizably human his psychology is, despite being inhuman. Real psychopaths exist, individuals who lack effective empathy and view others instrumentally. While most don't act out violently due to intelligence and strategic self-interest, their fundamental psychological structure mirrors Mahito's in disturbing ways. They navigate social situations by learning rules cognitively rather than feeling them emotionally. They manipulate others without guilt, and they pursue their interests without moral constraints beyond avoiding consequences. Mahito represents an unrestrained version of this psychology, freed from social consequences and empowered with abilities that match his grandiose self-image. This makes him a dark mirror reflecting capacities that exist in human psychology, but are usually suppressed by empathy, conscience, and social consequences. His character forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about what separates normal human psychology from monstrous psychology, and how much of our morality depends on feelings we often take for granted rather than on conscious choice. In conclusion, Mahito represents one of fiction's most psychologically accurate portrayals of complete empathy deficit and narcissistic psychopathy, wrapped in the supernatural framework of cursed spirits, but operating on principles that align disturbingly well with real psychological research into antisocial personality structures. His lack of effective empathy, his instrumental treatment of others, his grandiosity, his inability to accept limitations, his sophisticated manipulation combined with absence of genuine connection, all of these traits mirror clinical presentations of severe psychopathy documented in psychological literature. What makes his character particularly powerful is how he demonstrates that evil doesn't require hatred or trauma or corruption of something good. It can emerge from simple absence, the absence of empathy, the absence of internal moral constraints, the absence of recognizing others as mattering. Mahito is terrifying not because he's incomprehensible, but because he's too comprehensible. A logical extension of psychological traits that exist on a spectrum in human populations. Understanding his psychology doesn't just help us understand a compelling villain. It illuminates the crucial role empathy plays in human morality and society, and reminds us that the capacity for cruelty doesn't require malice, just indifference. If this deep dive into Mahito's psychopathic mind fascinated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more psychological analyses of your favorite characters. Drop a comment below telling me which character's psychology you want me to dissect next, and whether you think Mahito is pure evil or simply operating according to his nature without the capacity for moral choice. Until next time, remember that understanding darkness helps us appreciate the light.